All right. Good afternoon and welcome everybody to our webinar today on the Tennessee Grow Your Own Lessons Learned from the First Teacher Apprenticeship in America. It's really exciting to have you all here today with us. I'm excited to engage in this conversation. I am joined by two amazing experts in this work who have been two of the original founders of the Grow Your Own and now registered apprenticeship work in this country. Dr. Jean Luna from Clarksville-Montgomery County Schools, and also happens to be my former colleague at the Tennessee Department of Education, and Dr. Lisa Barron from Peay State University, the first university to have a registered apprenticeship program in the nation. Excited to have you both with me here today to talk about the amazing work that has occurred in Tennessee and now throughout the country. So speaking of which, it's June 2024, 2.5 years after the approval of the first program in the history of the United States of America for teacher apprenticeship. And now it's in 40 states. There's over 100 programs approved. And the U.S. Department of Labor has shared with me that it's actually the fastest growing occupation in the history of all registered apprenticeships, the teacher occupation. There's plenty of more to this. But my favorite thing is, and it always causes me to smirk, is when people refer to this work as an overnight success. There was many all-nighters put into this work by all of you, but I'm curious if we can start with setting the stage for this overnight success that took, no big deal, just minimum over 5 years, probably 6 or 7 years in the works. So we're going to focus on where this work all began in Clarksville-Montgomery County School System and Peay State University. And since you're both doctors, if you don't mind, I'll refer to you by your first names for free-flowing conversation. But Jean, we'll start with you. If you could give us a little bit of background from the district lens of starting this work, and then we'll turn it over to Lisa from a university lens. Jean?
Absolutely. So when we first started this work, to be quite honest, there was starting to be some teacher shortages, but to be quite frank, that was not our primary goal. So it was a couple of positions ago, to be honest. I was in a different role, but I was in the senior leadership team, and we were sitting around talking about, quite honestly, the lack of diversity among our teachers and the fact that our student population and our teaching population did not reflect one another. And so our teachers, it was substantially different when we looked at our minority teachers. And as we were thinking, we were talking about the fact that our classified staff was much closer. And so we had classified employees, and we had teachers' aides, and we had people in positions that were really good with kids that for whatever reason had not become teachers. And so it was really just brainstorming, those meetings where you're sitting around the table and you're just throwing out ideas to see what would stick. And we thought about what would it look like if we helped some of our paraprofessionals and to become teachers. Because when we asked them, why didn't you become a teacher? You're amazing. You could be making much more money. The conversation was life happened. And so they had children, they had bills to pay. And the answer was, we can't afford to quit a job and go back to school. And so we thought about, well, what would it look like if we let them keep their jobs? And we talked about what would it look like if we helped them go to school? And we just started throwing ideas about, what would it look like if we did a cohort and we could work with our local university? And so that's really where it started. And that was probably the first conversation started in 2017, even though we really didn't get it all in place and kicked off until 2019.
That's right. And so to build on what Jean said, we built the partnership first that allowed us to be transparent with each other and have kind of difficult conversations at first. We shared data from our College of Education. They shared their data. And we looked at it and realized we had the same challenges, and they weren't just similar, they were actually the same. And that was to increase diversity, number one, also to impact the teacher shortage. And as Jean said, we were kind of pre-COVID. So we didn't know how much worse it was going to get very, very quickly, but also have more teachers in high needs areas like special education. So then we worked together to design a program that could impact those issues.
So what I'm hearing is overnight success was 7 years in the making. Is that the main takeaway? Yeah. Jean, I really appreciate your point too about talking about the individuals who cannot afford to go back to school and not have an income. That's still to this day the thing that blows my mind. Traditional student teaching, that you pay tuition to a university to work for free in a school district. So really appreciate that focus, as well as on the need to diversify the profession so our teachers reflect more of the students that they are serving. So talk about starting this in 2017. I'm blessed to come into Tennessee in 2019 at the beginning of that year, new administration, new governor, new commissioner. And at that time, there was no data on teacher vacancies at the state level. It was clear we had a problem anecdotally. I also want to recognize, I see in the audience, one of the greatest superintendents and former Tennessee Superintendent of the Year, Danny Weeks. Superintendent Weeks would say, David, we got vacancies. Other people would say vacancies, but there was no tracking at the state level. And so we were able to work with the Superintendents Association to start collecting that data. We knew there was a problem, but unless you're actually able to show proof, it's hard to get people to act to show that there is a need there. In the meantime, though, while we were trying to collect that data and work with the Superintendents Association, Clarksville was submitting class size waivers that would help fund additional paraprofessionals in the classroom. Jean, there's a buzz term in education now beyond registered apprenticeships, and it's strategic staffing, but it's something Clarksville was always doing. Jean, can you share more about the strategic staffing model that Clarksville was employing at this time?
Absolutely. And so when I say we were building this plane in flight, we were really building this plane in flight. And so it was continually evolving and continually moving. And so as Lisa mentioned, when we first started talking about, well, let's get them, registered for elementary because that's our biggest bang for our buck. And then we're like, well, we're short-staffed in SPED. Can we add a SPED endorsement? Can we add, possible ESL? And so when we were talking about staffing, you have to remember this came, as you said, before COVID, before any ESSER dollars, before any grant dollars. And so we were really piecemealing this together. Some of it was with the generosity of our partners and talking to Austin Peay and saying, what can we do as far as an MOU to how can we partner together? Some of it was grant, but a lot of it was very strategic staffing. And so what we started to do is we were putting this in place. As paraprofessional positions were coming open, someone would resign, let's say, and in those non-crucial areas where we could get by, we were starting to freeze positions. We were starting, as vacant positions came open, we started really thinking about where can we shift dollars to create more dollars, because what we ended up doing, that initial cohort was 40. And so we were doing 20. Remember how I said we had paraprofessionals? Well, when we talked about this cohort, to be quite honest, we're like, we can't afford 40. So we thought, well, what if we did 20 paraprofessionals or classified staff members? Some of them were office workers. Some of them, we had a custodian, a bus driver who were interested. And then we also did 20 graduating high school seniors that were then going to become teachers, because the reality of that was these 20 students, for the most part, we could get a lot of them in almost for nothing. When you talk about the state of Tennessee and the grant dollars and the Hope Scholarship. So we were employing them and we were providing the support, but we were not having to fund quite as much for those students. And so that was the initial group of 40. The other costs we had to think about was an important piece of this cohort was the mentoring and the support, because that was the other element we didn't want to forget, because we had this unique opportunity. Instead of just 12 weeks of student teaching, essentially we're immersing these individuals in a classroom with really good teachers for 3 years. The reality is we knew, well, we have to pay those mentor teachers, those MCLs, those mentor teachers to help be mentors and to commit to this. So we paid them a stipend. So we really piecemealed a lot of this together in those initial phases of what the program looked like.
Jean, one thing I want to highlight that you said was that you started this work, and even when we launched this work, we did it without ESSER dollars.
Yeah.
This can be done. It was done, so as everyone talks about the ESSER cliff happening this fall, I'm like, this is where there's a will, there's a way. This was done before. We can show you how, and we're seeing folks be able to replicate this. And you were doing this all pre apprenticeship funding, not pre-apprenticeships, but before there even was apprenticeship funding for this work.
Absolutely. I think thinking about the funding that you have, thinking about what that looks like in your district, either federal dollars, state dollars, grants, and really thinking creatively. And again, there is no magic number. District sizes are different. Districts look different. But I think really this was born out of a need. And again, it started as diversity. We were very fortunate that, we really got on this before COVID hit, and we were really seeing the teacher shortages that I can't imagine where we would be right now if we had not started this, back in really kicking it off in 2019.
Yeah, go ahead, Lisa.
Sorry, now we're kind of talking about funding, and I know everybody always asks about funding, so I want to make some other notes about that. Austin Peay also, because of the president of Austin Peay and the provost so supported this program, because they knew it was not only good for our university and the district, but it was good for our community. They offered to just do a 50% reduction in tuition. That was huge. And honestly, we were very surprised by that. But they believed in the program so much, and that continues today. Another thing that helped our funding model is that we partnered with our community college. And in Tennessee, community college is pretty much free for most people. I mean, you could say it's almost free. There's some, outliers, but it's a free program. And so by partnering with our community college, that right there, and they got their first 60 hours at community college, that cut the cost of the program in half just by doing that. And then by us then cutting the next 60 hours of a 120-hour program in half, then you've got a 4-year degree, which we offer an accelerated 3 years. We have that now cut down to 25%. And so then it becomes a much more manageable price. And of course, there are other things that go into that: tuition, fees, assessments, all of that, which we made the commitment we're all going to be provided free to the students. But again, to your point, it's creative funding. It's thinking outside. I know I hate to use that term, thinking outside the box, but it really was trying to be innovative. Or how can we approach this problem in new ways? How can we bring in additional partners who would like to join us in this work?
And that partnership was so huge. And so I think with every need, as Lisa mentioned, every need we had, even when we sat down, and she mentioned sometimes some difficult conversations on the front end of this, and it wasn't that everyone wasn't willing, but it was thinking differently. So when we first approached and talked to Austin Peay, we talked about having these paraprofessionals, but we would need night courses. At the time, they weren't offering night education courses, but we're like, but we could. And what does that look like if some of our faculty and staff who were qualified and had doctorates may help teach some of these courses to offset some of that cost? What would it look like if we partnered with some other partners to perhaps pay for the books that they needed, so it costs nothing to our employees? So there was a lot of creative thinking in the beginning.
Yeah, that's right. It was so awesome to see the work that had been done between the district and the university in my role at the state. A few things, building off of what you both said. I feel like Grow Your Own is kind of like the stock market. With advice for that, they would say the best day to start investing was yesterday. Therefore, the second best day is today. You want to take time, have your money invested over long periods of time. But same with Grow Your Own. The best day to have started a program was yesterday. Therefore, the second best day is today. There's no time like the present. You can't worry that you didn't start one before, but you can start now. There's always a place, and it will change over time as you have lessons learned, or you learn from amazing leaders like Jean and Lisa here. The other thing too, I really appreciate, Lisa, your point about the community colleges. I tend to get some flack whenever I say this, but again, I'm the one who doesn't work in government anymore, so I can. And that is English 101 is English 101. So why would we pay university tuition when you can get the same course from a community college? It's about being a good steward of taxpayer dollars when you have these grow your own and registered apprenticeship programs. And so those partnerships are huge in the space. And our community colleges tend to be more diverse nationally than our universities. So it's also a potential place to recruit talent. I might have a little chip on my shoulder for this because I actually was a college dropout who, when I went back, went to a community college, and it really put me back on track. And the education I got there was just as good as, you know, anywhere else that I was able to attend. And so based on the work you two were doing, when I'm at the state, first off, I'm thinking, oh, wow, this is really exciting. How can we take this across the state? And, you know, fast forward a little bit, now we have the vacancy data to try to justify the need. And we began, I remember, taking from the work you all did and identifying some other practices from across the nation to have certain non-negotiables in place. Those non-negotiables were no out-of-pocket costs for the candidates. Everybody had to graduate dual endorsed in either special ed or English as a second language. Number 3, districts had to select candidates more diverse than their current teacher workforce. We saw the values and benefits of that. I think one thing, Jean, you hit on it earlier, Tennessee was only 12 weeks of student teaching. We did not believe that was enough time. So we did minimum, I think it was 2 years of seeking a bachelor's degree, or minimum 1 year of seeking a master's degree of student teaching or clinical internship experience. And then finally, we encourage programs to offer their services online. That way, great programs like Austin Peay could serve more than just the districts immediately around them. We wanted them to have a broader reach. And Lisa, you were sharing earlier about, you know, your president being willing to be bold and making and shifting, putting their money where their mouth is as far as how they prioritize this work. I'm curious though, you know, let's be real. That's a bit of an outlier. Austin Peay was willing to step out and try something different. What do you think made or gave the political power, courage, will to make those bold decisions? And then I have a couple follow-up for you, Lisa, but let's start with that.
So I think the key to the success of this program is that we were actually willing to listen to the district. And I know that seems very simplistic, but I think one of the problems with higher education is that we tend to think we have all the answers. And yet, if we design teacher education today from a blank slate, or we just started over, I think it would probably look very different than our current traditional model. And so it really began with CMCSS telling us what they needed and with us saying yes. They wanted, and some of the things like Jean was saying, I mean, it doesn't sound like it's very innovative, but we hadn't offered any of our teacher prep courses online before. And we hadn't offered them in the evening. And we hadn't offered them in 7.5-week terms. And all this we needed to do to be able to meet the needs of the apprentices, or at that time, the Grow Your Own residents, but also to progress them through the program quickly. CMCSS said they wanted to do a 4-year bachelor's program in 3 years because they wanted to get those teachers in their system quickly. We had never done that either. So those are pretty big things that we had never done. And yet we knew that we together wanted to design this program that was accessible, attractive, and affordable. Those were our 3 things: accessible to anybody who wanted to be a teacher, attractive, it needed to be something that sounded like a good idea to them, and affordable, which translated to being free to the apprentices. And when I have talked with other universities and districts across the nation, the one thing that I'm always a little disappointed in, perhaps, is that they want to jump onto the apprenticeship wagon. They all want it to be in the apprenticeship program. But sometimes they do that at the expense of skipping over partnerships. And I can categorically say that our success is tied to our partnerships, not only with CMCSS, but with other rural districts that surround us and now across the state. That is a foundation of this program, and it can't be shortchanged.
Yeah, yeah. Lisa, follow up here. And I also want to recognize people are putting questions that really good questions. We're going to try to embed those as well as we'll hit them at the end. In your work, one of the things too, Lisa and her colleague, Prentice Chandler, the dean at the university, because you'll never brag about yourselves, is that they have met with countless other universities completely pro bono and talked about this work over and over and over again for the last 2.5 years. So just want to acknowledge that. But Lisa, my question in regards to that is, what lessons have you learned in advising other universities in this work? And what are some of the challenges they've brought up? And I mean, I feel like you've always had answers for any challenge someone's brought up.
So, I don't know if we've always had answers, but again, we always say the foundation is partnership. That's what we always start on. But we also suggest that they have the right people in place, that they think about the systems and the structure of their program, how they want it to look, the design of it within the confines of the apprenticeship program, and then how are they going to manage that? It's not going to run on autopilot. You can't just launch an apprenticeship and do that without constant communication and engagement. And so we try to help them see that, some things you kind of need in place, like who's going to be managing this program, who are going to be the key contacts, how are you going to maintain communication and engagement, and all those things. But also, I want to say, I know certain non-negotiables need to be in place, the design of the program, funding, and all that, but don't wait until you have it all figured out to launch into it. You're not going to have all the answers before you get the questions. And so I think some people are so leery to go into it until they have it completely figured out. We've been doing this since 2019, and we still are learning and growing every single week. You would think we have it all figured out, but we don't. We don't have the kinks worked out. And that's the way it should be, because every apprentice is different. And so that means every cohort is different. Every district is different. And so the way we react and respond to one district is different than we do to another district. And it's because their needs are different. And so that's my encouragement to universities or districts wanting to engage in this work. Don't wait till you've got it all figured out. Just start, and maybe start small. Maybe start with a pilot group and then expand from there.
Lisa, I like that. Just even you saying how just one district to the next is different in your approach to them. In our work nationally now at the state level, we see it all the time. We say typically 60 to 70% of our work is fixed, but then 30 to 40% needs to be adapted to the local context. You're dealing with personalities, you're dealing with different needs, you're dealing with different priorities. It's been a fascinating learning curve. So back to the Tennessee work. Now we have this idea for a program to take statewide based on the model that the two of you all had been piloting. Jean, around this time, I believe you had joined us at the State Department. Thank God. It was so good to work with you. And one of the things I really want to highlight was one of the non-negotiables we had, which was the dual endorsement piece, requiring special ed or ESL. Those two endorsement areas made up over 20% of the vacancies in the entire state. We had to collect the vacancy data to be able to identify that as a problem, to then make it a non-negotiable. But at the same time, and we hit on finances earlier, but this was a really interesting piece. Now we could pay for up to 50% of the program with IDA funds or Title III funds if we required special ed, IDA, special ed, and ESL, Title III and ESL. And when we looked at how that money was being spent, oftentimes in the department, you were looking at special ed vendors who were getting paid the same amount of money for the last 5 years for professional development when they were literally developing fewer professionals because we were having shortages, we were having vacancies. And so it became, wait a second, could we use some of that money and we can get you new special ed teachers, new ESL teachers? And that was a win-win for everybody in this type of work. But in order to get other districts and universities on board, Clarksville-Montgomery, Austin, PNS, we went on tour. We went to East Tennessee, Middle Tennessee, West Tennessee, talking about this work. And I always believe states listen to states, districts listen to districts, universities listen to universities. So I'm curious to hear from each of you about the importance of whether it's communication, engagement, or credibility when it comes to rolling out new ideas at scale. Jean, if you want to start, and feel free to speak from both or either state or district lens, and then Lisa will hop over to you from an ed prep lens.
I think that when you're talking about communication, you're talking about credibility. I think the partnerships, as Lisa mentioned, but the other part of it, I think that is huge, is that continuous improvement mindset, not coming in and saying, we have the answer and you need to replicate this. That's not it at all. As Lisa said, we're still continuing to learn. We now are starting to have the data. What have we learned? What's the best practices? Where do we still have places that we can get better? So I think being very transparent with everyone, saying, hey, this worked for us. This is something we learned. Please, we're willing to listen to, as others are joining too. What are you doing? And maybe we can learn from you. So I think that give and take is really important as you're rolling things out, and then continuing to evolve. As Lisa mentioned, we have not been stuck in one model and we're going to ride this. Like, we're constantly saying, because that first year, we did not start even talking about community colleges. It was after the first year that we said, hey, we could probably work in partnership. There's plenty of space for all of us to work together on this. There's classes, as you said, English 101, that you can get more places than only a 4-year university. There are other classes you can't get at a community college, so let's focus those elsewhere. So I would say that, and always being willing to listen to the partners. You know, as Lisa said, it was not just us, it was also community colleges. It was workforce essentials. It was, there were a lot of pieces involved. And then that communication piece, always circling back. We had, we would have monthly meetings. We would have, we would gather groups together quickly as needed to say, hey, let's circle up because something doesn't feel right here. Let's add that to the agenda. So I would say that's some of what we learned, but definitely that continuous improvement of, we don't have this perfected yet.
One of the things we learned quickly at the beginning as well was the importance of supporting the apprentices. We were asking them to teach, work all day, go to class at night. Usually they would go to class Monday and Tuesday evening. They would have tutoring Wednesday and Thursday evening. And then that's on top of, many of them are non-traditional and have families and children and other responsibilities. So it was almost educational malpractice to put them in that type of situation and not provide wraparound support. So from the beginning, the CMCSS led the way in really showing how you support an apprentice in this type of work. I think without that level of support that they were committed to, I think there would have been a really high retention, or a really high attrition rate at the beginning. Just because, people can only do what they have the capacity to handle. And I think the apprentices going into the program and knowing they could count on that support from the district and from the university helped them be successful. Because this was a 3-year bachelor's program. So that meant we didn't cut out credit hours. It was the same 120 hours. It was same rigor and the same requirements, but they were doing it in 3 years. And so they literally went all year long. They didn't have any breaks. And they also didn't have the luxury, if they failed a class, they could just retake it. They had to move as a cohort. And so there was pressure on that. And I think that's one thing also when we talk to districts, and to universities is figure out that part of the problem too. Have some system strategies in place. How are you going to support the apprentices? Because they will need it. That's also one of the advantages of partnering with community college, because one of their missions is really helping those adult learners, those non-traditional learners sometimes be successful. So they had a lot of resources too that they could put into the mix. Also getting the right people in place. And I say that because it was so important for us from the university side to have somebody whose full-time job was overseeing this program, because as it grew, it became too big of a plate to put on anybody's table at some point. And so we had to have somebody whose full-time job was that. And that's made a huge difference for us from the university side of it as far as communication. But also we encourage districts to think about that. Who's going to take this on as part of their responsibilities? Because it's better if it's assigned as much as possible to one or two people instead of just, everybody kind of doing it as they can.
Yeah, yeah. So I'm gonna try to bridge now the grow your own into the apprenticeship. And in what I'm about to share, I'm going to try to answer some people's questions. So for those who submitted, please be listening. So we have these non-negotiables in place. We develop a competitive grant. This competitive grant, oh Lord, I always say we take the Kevin Costner approach, not Yellowstone, but Field of Dreams. If you build it, they will come. There was somebody who had posted a question in the chat about, having money and, will people apply for these opportunities? I was pretty nervous, but because, we knew Austin Peay would apply. We felt pretty good about that. But in our first round, we did a $2 million grant at the state level, 20 grants of $100K each. And we ended up having about 7 ed prep providers and I think it was around 23 districts that were awarded those funds. And then we ran another grant about 6 to 9 months later. So pretty quick for state government. And that's where we were able to scale to a total of around 65 districts and 14 different ed prep partners. And that actually captured way more than half of the state from a student population standpoint, because Nashville, Memphis, Chattanooga, and Knoxville were all involved in that. Our total spend was about $6.5 million for just over 670 individuals to become a teacher for free, get paid to do so. I want to be very clear. That money could only be used for tuition, books, fees, and licensure assessments. So I want to be clear, absolutely no student loans, no money could be charged to the student, the aspiring teacher, none at all. That went against everything we stood for. That goes against everything we still stand for today at the National Center for Grow Your Own. If you're charging people for these programs, there's a better way. We have 15 states that are now doing this different. Also, though, we did not supplement wages. I want to be clear about that. I think that's a bad strategy for long-term design, is to use apprenticeship funds for wages. You heard Jean talk about how they were able to already use positions that they had to cover apprentice wages or aspiring teachers. So speaking of apprentices, Clarksville then approaches us and says, you know what? Pretty cool. 65 districts, 14 universities, average cost of just under $10,000 per degree. We think we could do even more. Have you heard of this thing called registered apprenticeship? And I believe that was my classic response was, what's a registered apprenticeship? I had never heard of it. But we worked together. And so Jean, you and me, we got to know very closely Tyra Kopis, who was a colleague of ours at another state agency, Tennessee labor folks. And then at the time, Tennessee was a office of an apprenticeship state, meaning we worked directly with the U.S. Department of Labor. And so we worked very closely with Bill Kraus, who's now retired, and Mike Nelson, just two great individuals. Jean, can you talk about the process we went through to get the occupation of a teacher approved, working with Tyra, Bill, and Mike?
Absolutely. It felt a little bit like when we first really started the Grow Your Own in Clarksville. And so at the time, my role at the state, I worked closely with Department of Labor anyhow in my role with career technical education. So I knew the Department of Labor from the Tennessee side, but we started talking about what would this look like for apprenticeships. And so The reality is, if you know much about apprenticeships, it was widely acceptable for, let's say, electricians and for construction. And a lot of people knew that 4-year model and you become a journeyman. But when you talk about what that looks like for a profession or a career that's deemed, quote, white collar versus blue collar, there was some resistance, and that included even, I think, from when we first started talks with, the US Department of Labor. They're like, "Teachers? That's not an it just hasn't been done." And so we said, "But think about the model of apprenticeships and what that looks like, and the hands-on experience and learning and growing, and really getting to your place in that profession where you learn from experienced other professionals, and you are paying for the training. You are essentially getting them to that place being debt free. You don't charge a carpenter to become, a master carpenter. You're paying for that and you're progressing. And so we really thought about what could that look like? How could that look? And so I think in our initial conversations, it was more, no one was opposed, but it was more like we have to think very differently. And so we started some of that conversations, and then we quickly learned that if we were to make this happen, we had to think bigger than the state of Tennessee. So if we were talking about having this at the US Department of Labor, we had to have something that could be replicated at other locations. So we had to think about getting partners and support even outside of the state of Tennessee. So when they're saying in your application, you have to have letters of support, it wasn't just within Tennessee. And so we had to think bigger and broader. And I know we had a lot of those meetings, David, and thinking about, well, who could jump on board? And then again, I think every time we talked with some of those that we were asking for the letters of support, it was again thinking again outside the box, and they're like, what are you talking about, apprenticeships? But we felt it was so important because we had already started to see the need. By this point, we were a couple of years in with the teacher residents at the time, as they were called. They weren't yet apprentices. We were starting to see the need. Part of this, as we keep emphasizing, is we don't want anyone to leave with any student debt. We didn't want to burden anyone with that. The reality is a lot of non-traditional students, sadly, when they go back to college, they take on student debt, and they may take on student loans that are bigger to live. So to help pay for those expenses, that because they're not able to work. So even though we were employing these employees during the day, they weren't able to have a second job. They weren't able, and so they were starting to have some needs. So we learned about the opportunities with the apprenticeship model, that it could help bridge some of the needs with another source of funding. So that was really the advantage of why we really wanted to go after this money.
Yeah, that's right. That's right. And so, Jean, as you mentioned, we had to expand our thinking from Tennessee to the nation, which may have led to our application originally being denied by 2 different presidential administrations. And so I always like to joke that might be one of the only people on the face of the earth that got both President Trump and Biden to agree to something. The denial of the application that we wrote. So really good for character building experience. Great for my self-esteem. Great. So grateful, Jean, that you were a partner in this. It was always, we were always waiting for U.S. Department of Labor. Like, are they going to approve it, or has it been denied again? What feedback do they have this time? But with the occupation approved, then in January of 2022, the occupation got approved November 21, right around Thanksgiving. The occupation, and then the first program, Clarksville and Austin Peay, gets approved January of 2022. Lisa, from your end, I'm curious, how did this, if at all, change, being a registered apprenticeship, change anything you were doing with your grow your own teacher residency work with Clarksville or any other districts?
So interestingly enough, it didn't really change it, because what the apprenticeship model was our model. It was what we were already doing. It did allow us to expand, and we were able to offer it to more districts. I want to say that there are some rural districts that were not in that first Grow Your Own program, but then they were able to join and back to us talking about thinking about context and district needs. Some of our smaller rural districts said, we want to also be a part of the apprenticeship program, but we don't have the capacity or resources of maybe a larger district like Clarksville, but we want to be a part of it. And so it again started with those conversations. What are your needs? What are your challenges? And how many apprentices could you support? And then we were able to join several smaller districts who could only support 2 or 3 apprentices, but maybe they didn't need more than that, and make rural cohorts. And so it has allowed us to expand. And one of our most successful districts is a rural cohort that has just gone next level in providing support and thinking innovatively about how they can meet the needs of their students and their apprentices. So that's been a really fun thing to watch happen as they begin to really embrace this program. And now that we have over 200 apprentices in our pipeline, and which is amazing, we have graduated 105 teachers from our program who are currently teachers of record. And we started this conversation about diversity. Now we average 35% diversity in our cohorts, and that's compared to 19% diversity with a teacher workforce that's currently in most of the districts. So that's a huge step in the right direction. We also are getting early data from those first cohorts that their teacher of records, that they are excelling in their evaluations, and they are exceeding the evaluation scores of the traditionally prepared teachers. So that's all good news. I think all this hard work is now we're getting to see some of the research and the data behind it, and I think we're on the right road.
Yeah, I mean, who would have thought that more time under a mentor teacher who is the teacher of record would lead to better results? Who would have thought? What a crazy concept. Speaking of results, Jean, Lisa just talked about results from Awesome Peay and with their work with multiple districts. But I'm curious on the ground, and for context, the program gets approved for registered apprenticeship, and later that year in 2022, Jean, you get to go and become superintendent, or in Tennessee, it's referred to as director of schools of Clarksville-Montgomery, which I'm still so excited about that for you. Talk to me about what it's like on the ground floor, back in the district, but as a superintendent, the results you have seen from the teacher residency, grow your own work into the registered apprenticeship work.
Absolutely. As Lisa said, we're seeing some great results. So as we said about multiple partners and what this looks like, we have multiple partners in the district. And so we have community colleges. We also have other university partners. So we have multiple pathways. We have 5 different pathways when we talk about these teacher programs. So another part of this, besides the 3-year model, we were having people with a 4-year degree who were coming to us and saying, I want to be a teacher. That's allowed with the permit path in the state of Tennessee. But we developed a model where we pay for them to go get their master's and get that finished in a year and get the teaching certificate added on. And so at our district, what we're seeing is we have currently in place in Clarksville-Montgomery County, right at 200 teachers who came through one of our pathways. As Lisa said, many of them did come through the 3-year pathway, but we've also had some who have done that master's program. We have another 120 teacher residents currently that are slated for, the fall. And so, as she mentioned, we are seeing great results. We're seeing the average evaluation scores for especially from first year. So a first year teacher, our team score average is a 3.29. That's pretty good for a first year teacher on that 1 to 5 scale. By second year, it's up to 3.69. We are seeing higher retention rates. So because they are better prepared, they are not leaving us, but they have that wraparound support. They're still reaching out to those cohorts. They now have a built-in support of people who went through the program with them. Graduation is just the best. It's a tearjerker. So watching these non-traditional students who have spent 3 years together and they finally get to that culmination, it's beautiful to see. And we are placing them primarily in Title I schools. So they are being put in schools that to be honest can be really challenging. They're some of our highest need schools and they are still outperforming traditional students. And so again, that's part of what we learned as far as the the contract. And so they are, basically they're committed to us for 3 years. If we invested 3 years in you, you stay with us 3 years, and we place you for those first 3 years. So at our district, we are seeing great results. And again, in some of those high need areas, like you mentioned, with special ed, with math, with sciences, that's really where we're focused on some of these master's programs in those high need middle school areas, are those. And so while we do have some teacher shortages, it's not nearly as drastic. And as Lisa mentioned, the diversity piece is huge. So again, we have got right at about 30% of from all of our programs, our graduates are diverse.
That's awesome. Jean, I'm really glad you spoke about the retention as well. That is a huge question we always get about that. Like, what are the retention results here? And I do want to highlight one thing too. As Clarksville has focused on the dual endorsement pathways as well, there was really good research out of Temple University. I believe it was Dr. Allison Gilmore said, whether you teach special ed or not, getting certified in special ed leads to longer retention. And so I just appreciate the way Clarksville has approached this work for the needs of Clarksville-Montgomery students. And then Lisa, the way you've approached this for not just Clarksville, but also what's interesting is you serve districts nearby, but also all across the state now. So it's great work that both of you are doing.
I will mention one other thing, David, that I think is really important that we have seen because of the success of what this looks like, because a lot of people are like, well, where are you drawing people from now? If you've basically taken all your classified employees, we are seeing applicants because what we do is we do a new cohort each fall. We have people flocking in as far as applicants and people wanting to come. And so they are applying knowing they will become a paraprofessional as part of this program. But we have really seen, we have 2 to 3 times the number of applicants on average of what we can even accept. And so we have gotten better at selecting what that looks like as far as the applicants and some of their background as far as finding the best practices of success. So I really am excited that our retention rates actually keep growing and getting better.
That's great. That's great. So you go and become superintendent. I leave the department and try to take lessons learned from Tennessee. We form a nonprofit. Ben and Miles from the department join me. And now what's crazy is this overnight success is now in 40 states. We actually just added our 40th state today to our National Registered Apprenticeship and Teaching Network. We just got an email from Vermont about an hour and a half before this webinar saying, we want to join. It's really exciting work also to see states replicate this become a teacher for free and get paid to do so model. It is 100% possible when districts and universities partner together to figure out what is best for the people they are serving. With that said, Jean and Lisa, I'm going to call an audible and jump to Q&A because we got a lot of good questions and about 10 minutes left. So I want to make sure I am doing my best because there's some really good questions in there. Jean, just to reiterate, what is the cost of these grow your own teacher residency pathways in Clarksville for the candidate? Zero. You heard it here. I think we get asked that so many times because people just don't believe it.
They
but it
don't
is.
pay anything and they are employed. The other part
Mhm.
of that is so they are employed not only making an hourly wage, but we keep emphasizing they're paying into the retirement system already as a paraprofessional. So that the retirement system, everything starts, their benefits, all of that is part of it. So they don't pay anything for this at all.
Gene, for folks who are doing a post-bac, so master's degree program or registered apprenticeship, are they serving as a teacher of record in Clarksville?
So yes, so some of them, they could be on a permit. So it could be in the state of Tennessee, you can start teaching under a permit that you have to, you have to pass practice. You have to be in a teacher program. And so they can be serving as a teacher of record while earning, which then will elevate their licensure and change their licensure. So upon completion, they will become, a professional teacher and no longer a permitted teacher.
Gotcha. I know there are programs that do not allow that though, correct? Where they're still even with a bachelor's, they're still working as a para first and getting that
Correct. It really
master's or
depends.
postbac.
We work with every individual. And again, that's where I say, it depends on what their background is, what their degree is in, what permits are allowed. So I would say we
Mhm.
look at every single one of them. Some of them, you are absolutely right. Some of them are a paraprofessional, but again, it depends on their degree, if it's in that content area or not. So for instance, I might have a business degree, but I want to become a math teacher. There's a lot of what ifs that we have to work
Sure.
around. Yeah.
Sure. Lisa, you talked a little bit about wraparound services for somebody going back to school. The question is related to that. And if you or Gene want to talk a little more about this. This person saying, hey, they're finding that sometimes when they're working with their classified staff that they can be a little anxious about going back to school and even more potentially anxious when it comes to online learning. How have you managed it from a university lens? Gene, if you want to talk about from a district lens, but Lisa, let's start with you.
So I think that's one of the things that partnering with community college has really helped with that. It makes the transition to a 4-year university a little bit easier for them to start at the community college and then transition to Austin Peay. We So part of that is professional development, it's study skills. CMCSS does a really good job in helping their candidates before they start, helping them develop those routine studies skills that, well, we think of them as routine, but if you don't know them, you don't know them, right? And that's like taking notes and um, how do you create a calendar and keep up with your assignments? How are you accountable to your instructor? And how do you communicate professionally with your instructor? And just things like that I think sometimes we take for granted that are struggles for non-traditional. They have tutoring sessions that are available on Wednesday and Thursday. And let me just say this, when we first started this and we were outlining this to our faculty and we were talking about tutoring, we were talking about supports, we were talking about mentoring, we were talking about all the things that we were doing, make sure they're in class, to check on their grades, to track their grades, to track their GPA, all the things. We had people that would say, well, you're doing a lot of hand holding, it sounds like. And you know what I said to that? My son was a D1 athlete and he had a whole team of people following him around, making sure he was in class, tracking his grades, communicating with his instructors to make sure he was turning in assignments and he was showing up for class. They had a whole building set aside for athletes to receive tutoring and support. They had their textbooks delivered to them. They didn't have to go to the bookstore like the other students did. They had them delivered to them. They had a whole list of resources. And nobody complains about that. Nobody complains about a football player getting all of this sports. But suddenly for a teacher in training, suddenly we're hand holding. And I push back on that all the time. We should be helping them be successful. That's our job. And we can't over help them. We can't over do the resources. We have to make it so they can get through this program.
Thank you for that, Lisa. Jean, I know you have that experience too as a mother of a D1 athlete as well. But I'm going to jump to the next question because I'm going to give it to you, Jean. It's two different questions, but there's a related part. So somebody's asking about the role of unions. I'll go super high level first and just say Jean and I worked directly with TEA, the Tennessee Educator Association, and the NEA. They both provided, when Jean was talking about letters of support that we had to get for the original application, they both provided letters of support. So that was huge, especially as we're trying to get this approved for the nation. But more at the district level, Jean, can you talk about support from organizations like labor or just community members or business organizations that have supported this work or have been partners with you in this work?
Absolutely. So I think at the local level, we involved our education association fairly early and had conversations with them and made sure that they were informed and knowledgeable. So I think that's an important part of it is as you think about any of your stakeholders in these groups and thinking about making sure people are informed so they're getting the information from you, they can ask the questions from you before they form their opinion. And we absolutely did that. And it got to the point where the Education Association was so involved and so excited about this. And the reality is they knew that these apprentices could be future members. And so they actually were part of the initiative to fund some of the books. And so the Education Association actually paid for the books, and these residents knew that. So, I mean, what better way to publicize than to say, you know, hey, you might become a future member, and this is what we're doing. We're investing in you now. So we absolutely had support and buy-in early on.
That's great. Lisa, I'm going to give you 1 minute on this question. Can you speak to any work conversations that you've had around either credit for prior learning or competency-based, awarding credit for competency-based as you move forward, as once somebody's in the program? Can you speak to either of those in a minute, please?
So we are just in the very early stages of that. That's not one of the policies at our university yet. And so it's going to take some levers to move that. And we are looking at that, but we are really in the very early stages.
But I think that just speaks to in general, I'm not going to, it's not exactly continuous improvement because different folks need different opportunities. Competency based does not necessarily mean an improvement, but I think what's the key here, Lisa, is that you're keeping an open mind, you're exploring and figuring out what works best for your partners.
Right. And it goes back to the accessibility. We want it to be accessible. And so we know that many of our apprentices come with a lot of prior learning. They have had rich and fulfilling lives. And so we want to give them credit for that. But like I said, it takes a while to move all the policy makers toward that.
Yeah. And I think there's that rub against cohort based sometimes if you're doing, and there is power in being a part of a cohort. Jean, you spoke to that earlier. There's so many other good questions. We will put Miles Bank. You just put our email and website in the chat so folks have it. But Jean and Lisa, Jean, let me give it to you. Any final thought, 30 seconds, piece of advice you'd give to folks? And then Lisa.
I would say kind of like Lisa said before, if you're thinking about doing it, go ahead, get started. There's no time like right now, and reach out to people who are doing it and ask lots of questions and think about what it looks like and what are your needs, and don't be afraid to do it differently.
That's great. Lisa?
Again, just focus on the partnerships, focus on those conversations and meeting needs, and just do it. I don't know. It's just like, I want people to engage in the work because it's such a fulfilling thing to be a part of. And like Jean said, those graduations, and we have signing events at the beginning where we sign them as apprentices, and then we have the graduations, 3 years later. And man, if that doesn't make you feel like you are in the right profession, there's not anything that's going to move your heart better than that. So I believe we are headed in the right direction.
My last day on the job at Tennessee Department of Ed was at a signing day. at Austin Peay State. Ben drove me up there, and I couldn't have ended my tenure in Tennessee a better way. And to now hear that folks are graduating, the retention, the effectiveness, most importantly, kids are getting the teachers they need and deserve because of the work Lisa, you, Prentice, Jean, you, and your colleagues in the district, and now across the state. Just want to say thank you, Jean and Lisa, for your time. Folks, if you have any questions that didn't get to them, just send it to us and we will get it to them. But thank you so much for being here today. Jean and Lisa, thanks for sharing your expertise. And with that, have a good afternoon, everybody. Thank you so much. Take care now. Bye-bye.